ওকে, সো নমস্কার, শুভ সন্ধ্যা সবাইকে। Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the Kolkata R User Group's 12th virtual meetup. I am Samrit, lead organizer of Kolkata R User Group, and by profession, senior statistical modeler and art developer. So, our group is proud to be a diverse and inclusive community, welcoming individuals from all backgrounds and industries. So, whether you are a student, researcher, or professional, or simply curious about statistics, data science, and art, we invite you to join our session, ask questions, and learn from each other. So, if you missed out our previous sessions, do check out our YouTube channel. I will put the link of our YouTube channel in the chat section. The recordings are available there, and do not forget to subscribe the channel and do follow us on LinkedIn to get all the updates. So, without further ado, let us welcome today's distinguished speaker, Aarsh Batra, who will enlighten us on the topic More Than Code, R for Research, Advocacy, and Expression. So, Aarsh is a data scientist with the London School of Economics and Political Science, based in Ghaziabad, India. With a background in economics, maths, and data science, he has worked across healthcare, air quality, and environmental policy. In 2024, inspired by his work EPIC, he founded Bite-Sized AQ, which is an open source initiative that makes air pollution research accessible through simple bite-sized insights. So let's welcome again Ars. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samrit, for the introduction, and thank you everyone here for joining on this Sunday evening. I will talk about for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So, a little bit about me. I, as Samrit mentioned, have a background in economics and math and data science. And I have mostly worked so far in the research and development sector and mostly focusing on econ research. And in those roles, I have been responsible for data related jobs, whether it's uh, data analysis or visualization, modeling, or cleaning, all sorts of data related stuff. And currently, I am working as a data scientist with LSE in my current role. And prior to this, I was working with U Chicago in another role, and I was based in Delhi for that. Uh, so yeah, that's a little bit about me. And a pun intended, like here, I never knew that my name would ultimately have the word R in it, such that like my parents definitely did not name me with this in mind. But someone at my workplace gifted me this t-shirt which says this exact same thing, and I realized it at that point. And I think this is a one of those funny coincidences which turned out well because I use a lot of R. So okay, great. To get started, let me mention that this talk is not about code, or I'm pretty sure that everyone attending here is a better at R than me because like I am also a very early career professional, and I am very it's just been a few years for me in this language, but the experiences that I've had working in this language and some other languages like Python and Stata is a very economics focused language, and it's something that I'll talk about later in the presentation. Uh, uh, those experiences led me to view R as a language not just for coding, but as a language for advocacy and expression within a given field, which may or may not be open to using a language like R. And this is something that I plan to talk about more in the coming slides. And this talk is not technical, so if you don't have a R background, that's completely fine. That this is more of a big picture talk for you to see how a particular field adapts and how a particular field does not adapt in various cases, and how you can be the person who can convince your research group or your team or your like fellow friends, etc., to pick up something that will help them and their uh, organization. So the motivating example that I'll choose, of course, is economics because I have been working in this field for approximately 6 years, past 6 years, and I'll walk you through how this field has evolved, and then I'll talk more about what that entails. So, in the early 90s, the field of economics started shifting from SPSS and SAS as their primary tools to a language which called Stata. And I'm sure a lot of you might be aware of it. But Stata is a very like it's a tool that is very famous in economics, and a lot of the academic community uses it. It's not an open source tool. It's a proprietary language, but something that's very famous in economics and something that I got introduced to early on when I was an undergrad. And at that point, I did not know that R could be a choice because that is what was taught uh, in our curriculum. And so yeah, so in like early 90s, economics shifted to Stata. Like early 2000s, Stata became mainstream in economics. And then around that time, R version 1 was released. Uh, Open like and at the same time there was like a general rise in open source in the early 2000s. uh, then in early 2010 our popularity surged because like new tools like R Studio, R Markdown, R Shiny were released in this decade, and economics still used mostly used data. In the late 2010, tidyverse began to revolutionize R, and economics started to adopt R. Like it's what around 20 years, uh, and still a field like economics was using a language like Stata uh, in its main course curriculum, or even in the academic research, the professors were using a language like Stata, even though alternative tools were available. Uh, Stata currently remains prevalent in economics, and there's a growing interest in other languages like R and Python. But at least in the academic community, Stata is a very specifically targeted language that one needs to like progress. So what's the future here? And let me be very clear, like this talk is not about shaming a non-open source language like Stata or any other language that is not open source. Stata is a great tool, or like other languages that exist, other like there could be other languages that you use like SPSS or SAS, etc. All of those are great tools. But this talk is more so about how the choice of tools in a particular field and the level of openness to adapt once new tools are, you know, once new tools come in, how those two things can eventually, in the long term, make a big difference as to how that field looks like to an outsider. And I have been inside the field so long that I did not realize until I talked with a lot of people as to how they look at econ from the outside. And that is when I realized that economics is a very seemingly economics is a very closed field, so to speak, because a lot of what we economists do is we do a lot of research, but a lot of that research is done with the sole objective of publishing uh, papers in high impact journals, which is something that is very important, of course, but that's not the sole objective of research. Publishing in high impact journals with statistically significant results is a good thing. That's true, but that's I think has become the sole objective of economics as a field at this point, and they have let uh, most of the economics academic community has let go of why we like the objective of why we actually like why we actually do research in the first place. And sometimes it can be very annoying, so to speak, to be part of groups that are very, very closed and very, very not open to sharing work or not open to using new tools. So, so what is stopping economists from adapting? The pattern that I have seen in the research groups that I have worked with is that there's this legacy of using certain tools, and those tools become famous. And then, of course, those tools are very useful. For example, a tool like Stata is very useful to run quick regressions. It's also very useful to do a lot of quick statistical tests and things like that. But it does not have all of those features that a modern programming language like R and Python has. And because of that, sometimes and it's also not included in the curriculum. So it's difficult for people to see what the benefits are, and then it leads to a lack of incentive. And that lack of incentive often leads to these misguided notions. And that is what I'll talk about in this slide. So the incentive gaps come from this top-down dilemma, the fact that the top will determine what the bottom half, like the others, will do. Like the professors will determine what the students or the research associates or the pre-docs or the PhD students would ultimately use. And the students often feel the pressure to comply, and they end up not getting the opportunities to explore new tools. In my experience, and also in the experiences of a lot of people that I have talked with, there's a limited focus on R and more. Whenever I say R in this talk, think about R, Python, or any other open source tool, or you can also think about uh, anything open source. Say, for example, GitHub, having a GitHub repository or some anything like that. But I'll just use the word R as a uh, to keep it short. Yeah, there's a negligible open source focus, and on the job exploration opportunities are minimal. And there's this personal resistance to switch that comes due to all of this, because then people think, like, why bother? Like, why even bother if Stata does the job to make me like a research associate in an organization and do my work? Why even bother? Like learning a new language. And then the organizational resistance to switch is, of course, always existed, because the organizations that hire you often are very clear as to what exactly they want. And so that's another thing. But this unfortunately leads to these misguided notions that R or Python and other open source languages are hard to pick up. I'm like, there's definitely a learning curve to these languages, and but it's no more difficult. But economic students are used to, say, a lot of math, a lot of quant concepts, a lot of other types of complicated stuff. So I'm sure that they can also pick up R or Python if they want to, or if professors are open to, or the universities are open to including it in their curriculum, for example. But the misguided notion is that it is hard to pick up. And then the other misguided notion, which is the real problem, is that economists aren't required to be software developers. And that is very sad, because when you pick up a research paper and you pick up like every research paper nowadays requires you to submit a reproducible package, right? And that reproducible data package that has all the data and code in it, if you try to pick, say, 50 econ papers and you try to reproduce the results, you would be surprised as to how much irreproducible those results are. And that is the sad part. The fact that uh, the people who are reviewing all that research, they are doing a very good job at reviewing and peer reviewing all that research, but there is the weightage that they put in terms of how good the code should be organized and how version control should be done, or how uh, documentation should be done, is not as does not have a very high standard. And even the topmost papers in the topmost journals would have reproducible packages that don't actually reproduce results. And that is the sad part, uh, which often is like, which strikes me hard, because I feel bad not for the people who are on the top, but for the people who are just entering the field. And uh, those folks, like a person who's just finished their 12th standard and trying to see econ as their future field of interest, they think of these obstacles. Like, for example, R is hard to pick up. We don't need to be programmers or software developers. We just need to run regressions like robots. But that's not the case. And the other thing is publish first, open source later, perhaps. And this is exactly the kind of language that I've heard working in the research group when I start to, like, say, advocate for open sourcing our code base or research. Like, I've often heard things like, okay, we'll focus on publishing first, and maybe we can then make it open source later. But that later never comes. Uh, and that is again, and these kind of things are the troubling side of economics that are often not talked about much. And this this talk, when I say that this talk is about R not as a language of code, but as a language of advocacy, is that these are the parts that we need to advocate about, not just in economics per se, but your field could also be facing similar issues. And uh, it you can be the person who can advocate for that change in your research group. And no one needs to change the entire field in a night. It can be like you doing some advocacy to use some open source tool in your research group, and then that research group will talk to other research groups, and it will start like a bottom up. This is kind of like a bottom up approach to tackling this problem, because we can never wait for the top down approach to work. And at least that has I have found success uh, doing this, and I'll talk more about it uh, in the coming slides. So yes, if you're like if you have faced similar challenges in your field, I think this motivating example is for economics, but uh, it's generally applicable to any other field that is not trying to adapt to the modern times. And yeah, so I think the lessons are more general. And the idea is that uh, people work in silos, right? And they are often working on the same thing. And they don't even realize that they're working on the same thing, because precisely because they're working in their silos, trying to publish first, and being very competitive with each other, which is very good. But the competitiveness can come with the collaborativeness. That's not mutually exclusive. Uh, those two things can happen together. It'll be very difficult for an economist, if someone is an economist in this, uh, you know, uh, talk, who is attending. I'm sure it might. I'm not entirely sure if maybe you understand this, maybe not. But it's all like when I've talked with people about this, people sometimes say that, oh, maybe these are mutually exclusive things, but though they are not mutually exclusive. And the R community is an example of that. The fact that the community is an awesome community, the fact that the community produces like awesome packages, tools, etc., open source, and it's also people naturally competing with each other, but also producing open source work that ends up helping a lot of other folks. So this collaborativeness is what I think should be targeted and advocated for, irrespective of what field you work in. And it can be a very small, uh, it can seem like a very small thing, but I think uh, you as an individual, and I think at this point, I like to take the example of, say, for example, Hadley Wickham, who individually uh, changed the R ecosystem by himself to a huge extent by introducing the tidyverse and associated packages. So yes, and like an individual can make a lot of difference. So don't ever think about the fact that, oh, what would I do? Like, what can I do? I don't think that should be the stopping factor. I recommend, uh, sorry, I recommend doing the advocacy where possible. And in economics, there's this concept of virtuous and vicious cycles, and I think like so economists, I like to talk about here about this a little bit because it's related to what we are talking about. Economists talk about this virtuous and vicious cycles, the fact that some countries end up on a virtuous path and some countries end up on a vicious path. For example, the UK or say the Western Europe or the US ended up on a virtuous path at some point in history, which led them to becoming the first world or the rich countries, while most of the global south, or say, for example, the Latin America or the African nations, did not. I think I would go as far as saying that it's similar to similarly applicable to fields. Any field that has chosen the virtuous path of being open about sharing research, making its research open source, using open source tools, will end up in this virtuous cycle that will hope. I'm not saying that open source is and always a success story, but I think it has those components that makes it more likely to become a success story than any other non-open source way of doing work. And it's safe to say that we have a lot of examples that like back this statement. And similarly, if you are not open source, working in silos, and if your field is kind of like that, you're eventually, uh, in case of, for example, economics, you might eventually produce the next generation of economists may not, uh, maybe even worse in terms of, how they share their research or how they view economics as a field and how they actually teach economics to the next generation of economists. So, uh, yeah, so this is like kind of like a virtuous and vicious cycle that I think like to kind of think about when it comes to open source versus non-open source languages. And this is something that ChatGPT or any LLM can never teach you, like how to build an open source culture. That's something that has to be inculcated. That's something that has to be discussed, advocated for. You will be rejected like tens of times, and then 11th time you might get accepted, and then something else will come in between, and then it's like a continuous cycle. And this is something that you have to just take a first step towards. And there's no right way of doing it. There are certain guidelines and certain ideas that will help you achieve this. And but at some point you have to just get started. If you think that your field is in such distress and needs rescuing, or if you think any problem which can be solved by using a better tool, which at the moment is not being solved due to not that tool not being accessible or for other reasons. So yeah, so this is something that you have to get started on yourself. And this is where my so when I was working for U Chicago, my one of my first experiences was to work on this project called the Air Quality Life Index project. And this project basically translates the air pollution concentrations into corresponding life expectancy loss numbers. So, for example, if you live in a particular region, uh, say in Delhi or Kolkata, for example, in your particular district, how many life years you are losing as a result of breathing a particular concentration of air pollution. That's the research that we made, and we made a like interactive tool out of it and like published it so that people can see it. But when I joined the project, all of that work was mostly not open source, and all of that work was uh, did not use any sort of open source languages in the code base, and it was very hard to maintain. So one of my jobs was to transition that entire project to R. And I initially there was some backlash in terms of why we should do this, because there's no need. Project is running fine. It of course it takes some time to update things and do things, but there's we can still work it out as we have done in the past few years. But I using various tools in our making our shiny dashboards or use producing Quarto reports, automating workflows, doing version control on GitHub, creating a GitHub repository, etc., without waiting for someone to tell me that, oh, you have to do this. I did some of those things, and then I ended up showing some of those results to my team members and my managers, and eventually they saw the benefits and they realized that yes, the benefits outweigh the costs. And it took some months to like convince them, but now that project is completely open source, and the way they update their annual updates that they do are all done on GitHub, and it's completely open source. Like, and you can of course like go and access it on the AQLI GitHub repository now. So that was one of my successful advocacy experiences. I have had other experiences in which I was not as successful as I thought, but uh, I do think that overall these everything that I did was worth it, and like I'll continue to do this while I'm in econ as much as I can, with irrespective of which research group I work with. Even currently, the research group that I'm working with is very happy with the R language, even though they're a data focused research group, especially because R does speaks for itself, and once you kind of show what kind of benefits it has and what kind of work it can do to like ease your life, uh, people start to get convinced. And I think it will take some time, but eventually people uh, will start to, you know, get convinced. And that led me to start bite-sized AQ. Like after Epic U Chicago, I'm still very interested in air quality, and I started this GitHub repository, which I am eventually planning to convert into a Quarto website. But at this point, it's just a GitHub repository, which open sources a lot of air quality related work that I do, both data and non-data focused research. For example, I wrote a satellite data processing pipeline for processing PM2.5 aerosol data. Uh, that pipeline is now open source, and I produced data sets, regional data sets out of those. This pipeline, those are open source, and there are like other more than a dozen projects at this point which share different kinds of resources with the community, and all of that is open source. And I'll continue to do that in the coming months and years. So, all of this has been very, very satisfying and worth it. And I did mention like this talk is not about code, but I'll mention a few things, like some recommendations on how you can get your teams on board the open source train. And there will be some words here, say for example, R packages and Quarto. If you do not have an R background, just think of these tools as something that R language has that makes everyone's lives easier. So yeah, streamline your code into functions and functions into packages, to demonstrate its benefits, automate various types of reporting using Quarto, build our shiny dashboards for team members, especially non-technical team members, to explore clean data sets, promote starting a GitHub repository, and even you can begin with a private one, because making a private repository public is just like flicking a switch. So if a private repository exists, the advocacy work of making it public can go in the background, but just try to see if you can convince your team to start a private repository, even if they don't initially agree to make it public. And always try to foster openness and collaboration with different kinds of workshops. And even if you don't, uh, if you're in a field that does not use open source tools, you can always take the initiative and set up workshops or hackathons in which you uh, can introduce people to those tools. And eventually, I think that has proven helpful for me, and that has uh, proven as like a seed that eventually leads to uh, people starting to like talk more about that tool, and then eventually starting to use that tool in their work. it's kind of like connecting the dots. So R has all of these amazing features, and once you connect all of these dots, whether it's reproducible research and reporting, interactive apps, open source version control, package development, databases, machine learning capabilities, and on top of that, the most important is the awesome community. Uh, the community of like I haven't had such an experience with any other programming community. I have worked in MATLAB, I've worked in Python, I have worked in Stata, but the R community has something special, and I have had uh, like the best experience in working in this uh, language, and especially because of the community. And like once you connect all these dots, a picture emerges, which is very difficult to ignore. And once you connect these dots for the team that you're working for, they will also definitely see that, oh, this is something definitely not ignorable, and we have to think about it more seriously. So, yeah, to summarize, this is like a bottom-up approach. Uh, and as I like to, if you have to take away one thing from this talk, I would say build it and they will come. So just build whatever you can and show it to your team members, carry out a workshop, do organize a hackathon, build stuff and things like whatever you can to break the mold if you are working in a field that is very close. And eventually people will adapt. And this is what I think. As of now when I use Stata and R together. Like I still use Stata because, see, the thing is that we cannot say no to the team members that we are working with. And I'm happy to use a language like Stata when it's useful. It's useful in various contexts. It's even faster in various contexts sometimes when you have to just run quick things and not worry about uh, other things. So I definitely think that it's a great tool, but I think it's a great sidekick, like Robin, but R and Python are kind of comparable to Batman here. I don't know if there are any Batman and Robin fans, but I hope the analogy is clear. And open source is like the other analogy that I would like you to take away is open source is kind of like this picture, which is like very fluid, adaptable uh, to new scenarios and new things, while anything that is not open source is kind of like this rigid thing, which is very hard to change. And if you change one thing, the other breaks, and like you change the other thing, and third thing breaks, and then something collapses, and then something falls apart. So I think at the end of the day, I'd rather choose this fluidity and adaptability to maintain my long-term work than being like rigid, working in a rigid framework. Even though you can be working in a field that is rigid, but you can always try to add some fluidity to it. That is the kind of message that I would like you to take away from this. Finally, as a, let me see if I'm on time here. Okay, I think I still have around 5, 6 minutes. Okay. So, sorry. Okay. And when it comes to R as a language of expression, so I think I started seeing these amazing, beautiful visualizations online by folks like Georgios Karamanlis, Nicola Reddy. I think there are hundreds of other people, but to name a few, I think what else? Kara Thompson, Dipali Kank, and various others who produce these beautiful visualizations using ggplot. I think I saw that, started to see that and follow that work around 1.5 years ago, and I realized, like, I first at my first sight I did not believe that something like that can be produced out of R. It almost looked like an artwork, and I used to produce decent ggplot visualizations at that point, but it was nothing, and it still is nothing comparable to the kind of work that these folks are doing. But that did motivate me to do more serious data visualization work. Like, figuring out what font color should go with what background and what gradient should go with what font color and where a particular label should be placed and whether it should be placed or not, or whether how much text should be put in a graph, or whether the like subtitle is properly spaced from the title, whether we should add a caption or not, etc. Everything you can control in a language like R, and that when I realized that and when I started to have like chats with these folks, I realized that this is most like it's kind of like just making art, but using computer code, and you can control everything down to the smallest detail. And I realized that this is something that I would like to do, and I do it on my own pace. I do it as a form of it's a meditative experience for me, and like I do it as a form of I take my own time, and like I started doing this kind of work, which is why like I think R is a kind of language for expression for me too at this point. I and some of my these are some of the starting works that I did, and of course this is not at all comparable to any of the work that you might see online for a lot of other folks that I mentioned. But I think uh, when I started doing these kind of visualizations, I realized that it's R is much more than a language just for code. You can use it for research, you can use it for advocacy, you can use it for expression to express yourself in various ways. And I think which is why there is much more to R than one might think when they get introduced to a language like this. And yeah, so these are just some of the works that I did over the past 1.5 or 2 years, and I realized that all the beautiful things that you can do in art. So yeah, just to mention uh, the torchbearers of this field, and you of course might all be aware of them, whether it's Posit, our consortium, our studio, Cran, Thinkar, Epsilon are for the rest of us, and then there are hundreds of individuals behind these amazing organizations who are making amazing tools and leading the charge in this our revolution. Or I so so I think uh, thanks to them and for serving as the torchbearers for this field. And yeah, I think that was it. I'd like to thank you for joining. And if you'd like the copy of this presentation, you can scan this code, or you can just message me or email me. I can send you a link. I'll just keep the slide here for a second. Thank you, Samrit. That was it. I'll be happy to take any questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Ars, for your wonderful session. So it's now
Thank
time
you.
for question Q&A. So if you have any question, you can ask him directly or can ask in the chat section as well.
Oh, I see one. Maybe okay. Oh, that was a different message. Okay. Yeah. If you'd like to connect, if you don't have any questions now, or if you'd like to connect at a later point, I'm just putting in my email here. I'll be happy to chat offline too. If you'd like to get in touch, please do so. But yeah, happy to answer any questions if anyone has.
Okay, I think there is no question.
No
So
worries, no worries.
yeah, we can wrap up this session now. And thank you
Thank
once again, Ars,
you.
for your wonderful session. This is very insightful.
Th-
I
Thank
personally
you
liked
so
it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I look
Hmm.
forward to following your at Kolkata R user group's work. Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, keep watching, keep watching this space. We will be organizing many more sessions like this in next coming up days, maybe in next month. So yeah,
Thank you,
thank
David.
you. Yeah,
Thank you so
till
much.
then, keep learning, keep
Yeah.
stay happy and stay safe. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye bye.